This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg in South Africa. I'm Sir Marshall. I'll be your presenter today. This show is live and broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube with the entire show available on our YouTube channel. Today we commemorate the death of Chris Hani. It's the 22nd anniversary of his passing, and we ask the all-important question this morning: is reconciliation possible in South Africa in the light of what is currently happening? We chat to the next South African woman to summit Mount Everest, and we close the show with the annual Portuguese festival, the Land. But first, let's get the day's news with Hani.
Good morning, I'm Hani. Let's just have a look at the stories making headlines today. Leaders of the ANC alliance, led by President Jacob Zuma, will pay tribute to the late struggle stalwart Chris Hani. Today marks the 22nd anniversary of the former SABC Communist Party leader's death. The Chris Hani Memorial and Walk of Remembrance Monument will also be unveiled in Johannesburg. This as a series of events are underway countrywide. Angry residents have gone on the rampage at Umlazi, south of Durban. Last night, foreign shop owners were forced to abandon their shops under heavy police guard as the community looted businesses. About half a dozen shops were vacated. Community members say the looting was sparked by the death of a woman who was shot dead, allegedly by one of the foreign nationals. The University of Cape Town is now ready to start with a long-term campaign for transformation. This after the statue of Cecil John Rhodes made its exit from UCT yesterday evening. Students pelted it with paint and rubbish, and it was finally removed after nearly a month of protests, sit-ins and meetings. Earlier this week, the university's council voted overwhelmingly to remove the statue. Heritage Western Cape will now make a final decision on its fate. The celebrated voice of cricket, Richie Benaud, has died at the age of 84. After battling with skin cancer, the news of Benaud's death has prompted a flood of tributes from around the world. The former Australian cricket captain was known as a giant figure both on and off the field. Benaud died in his sleep in a Sydney hospice late yesterday. And an emotional service was held for former Bafana Bafana and Free State Stars player Richard Hinakanyane. Fellow players and administrators from various PSL football clubs praised the 31-year-old striker who died in a car crash earlier this week. This comes amid road fatalities which claimed the lives of prominent soccer players, where accidents seem far too common.
When the coaches and administrators say to you, guys, take time out, I do not want this death to be in vain. Let us learn from the death of Richard Hinakanyane.
Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Hani. Now, South Africa experienced numerous human rights challenges during the apartheid era. In 1995, the democratic government envisioned the TRC as a mechanism that would help deal with the evils of apartheid. Over 20 years into democracy, South Africa has not managed to come to terms with their past on a morally accepted basis and to advance the cause of reconciliation. The legacy of apartheid still hounds South Africans, as reflected recently with controversy around statues, street names. The list is quite endless. Black and whites are still poles apart and have become more and more polarized. But has the time not come to accept that the air is human? And after 20 years, how do we move forward? From the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation, we are joined in Cape Town by analyst Ayanda Nyoka. Ayanda, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us here in Newsroom.
Good morning, Sam, and good morning to your viewers as well.
Okay. Let's recap. Let's take a look at today. How do we as South Africans come to terms and deal with our past history without being at each other's throats? And I think maybe that is ultimately the question.
Well, I think there are several things that we need to perhaps understand. what is useful to draw from is the Reconciliation Barometer Survey, which the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation now has been running since 2003. It is a public opinion survey which measures public opinion on reconciliation in South Africa. And one of the key things that we've found since we've been running the survey is that the South Africans in general still desire to see a more united South Africa, which I think that is a positive, starting point in terms of prospects for sustaining reconciliation in South Africa. However, what is concerning, though, even though there is this desire, this overwhelming desire for unity, what we see is that when we ask South Africans, so what do you think is the major source of division in South Africa today? And what we have found since 2003 that we've been running the survey is that majority of South Africans consider class inequality a major source of division. And so when we're wanting to understand, how do we address issues of reconciliation, I think it's important that we get a good sense of what are the current sources of division in South Africa today and how do we overcome those issues. And so for me, I think the issues of, economic exclusion are very critical when we're thinking about reconciliation in South Africa. How do we redress economic inequalities? I think that is the important question that we need to be addressing currently in South Africa with regards to reconciliation.
Ayada, why when we talk to different experts related to different things, you mentioned something that's quite pivotal and I think is an important discussion, is economic exclusion. But over the last couple of days, we've seen statues being removed. Over the last 5-10 years, we've had the street name debate. There's even one currently raging in Cape Town around Effie de Klerk being the boulevard coming into Cape Town. Why is it such an emotive issue? Why can't we just move past this issue of reconciliation? We're almost past our 20 years of democracy. We are no longer an infant. We're an adult now. And yet people are still struggling just to talk around race, color, things that separate us, things that make us different. Why is it such a difficult pill to swallow?
Well, I think that, there's an important conversation that perhaps South Africa did not adequately attend to when we had our transition in 1994. But also, we had the TRC process, which was a very important, landmark in South Africa's history and transition. But there's a broader process that South Africa needs to undertake, which requires that we engage with issues of the past. But now the issue is, how do we frame these issues? So do we frame these issues, around race? Do we constantly frame these issues around race? So, for example, if you're looking right now at the whole debate around the statues, there is a sense, that there are, sections of our society, for example, that are, putting a racial frame to what is going on around the statues, which for me, I don't think that's a correct. That's a correct way of really unpacking what is going on, because you'll find that the issues of the statues, the debate around the statues right now, it's not necessarily that all black people, for example, hold a similar view that the statues must fall. In the same manner, it's not all white people hold a similar view, that the statues must fall. So we need to be able to transcend dialogues that are racially polarizing. And how do we do that? I think it's important that we create platforms that encourage inclusive dialogue, but at the same time that encourage that we confront our past in an honest manner, that brings together narratives from the different racial groups in South Africa in terms of how we have experienced the past, but also how the past continues to impact in our present circumstances in South Africa.
Ayada, are we sitting on a ticking time bomb? Because every time something comes up that now we're dealing with history, we're in effect talking about our South African history and how that history needs to be integrated, or how we need to experience that history in a new democracy. Are we sitting on a ticking time bomb?
Well, I think that if we don't have the courage to confront the past, in its entirety and all the various dimensions, of apartheid, because it had so many dimensions. It wasn't just about, segregation, but it also entailed, economic exclusion. It also entailed cultural exclusion and so forth. And so there are various dimensions that we need to address relating to the past, and we need to have that courage. And my concern is that if we do not have the courage and are not tolerant enough to be able to sit together in dialogue, I think that we do run the risk that we might continue and perpetuate these divisions in the future. But also, I think if our present generation fails to address these issues, I think it does place a burden on future generations to have to then, catch up with these issues and be confronted with these issues. And so it does constrain the prospects for South Africa to have a shared future, but also to have an inclusive society.
Ayanda, there's something interesting here because we're running out of time, but I quickly just want you to wrap this up because there's 2 points to my next question. The TRC was set up in terms of the Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act. Many can argue that act hasn't been managed properly. Number one is also, the other issue is related that we're seeing a lot of youth rise up against the issues of statues and representation. What are we saying about that discussion? We've been so eager to move on with this new democracy. We've been so eager to pat each other on the back and say we're brothers and sisters. But we have left out that the born frees, as they're titled, and we've seen a lot of them. The issue of Rhodes University, UCT, all of those kind of issues. It's the youth that are having a problem with the way history is represented in our current space.
Yeah, I think for me, we need to, number one, problematize this concept of born frees. What does it mean to say that, South Africa's youth today, are born free? Whereas we know that, South Africa's, there are continuities between past generations and the current generation, particularly in terms of, thinking around issues of intergenerational poverty, but also, critical issues that are being raised by young people around other forms of racism, such as institutional racism. These forms of racism have been left to continue. And young people, as they're going into different institutions, whether it is in the workplace or in the education sector, they are still confronted with similar barriers that their parents were confronted with. And so for me to try and kind of disconnect the experiences of an apartheid generation and a post-apartheid generation, as we have framed it around born frees, is a bit problematic. And we need, I think, the response that we need is to say, how do we then reconfigure society in a way that, we provide opportunities for young people to break the cycles of intergenerational poverty. We also deal with issues of equal opportunities for young people, equal opportunities to access quality education. Those are critical issues that young people are having to battle with. And so, hence, the experiences of young people today are very much, still drawing on that past.
Ayanda, thank you very much. We've unfortunately run out of time. That's the research analyst at the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation, and Ayanda Nyoka, talking to us about what has been really labelled as a contentious issue across South Africa, the fall of statues and what they represent to who and what part of our history they play. Okay, let's take a quick look at your tweets. It's at SABC Newsroom. This comes from City Lab. I think we received about 5 or so. It says, in Cape Town, students topple a relic of apartheid, and that's hashtag Rhodes has fallen. Then as we scroll up, and you can see an interesting picture that says next to the invisible statue, and that comes from Kolofelo, who's also hashtag Rhodes has fallen. Firebrand at Simpiwe Dana says, beautiful, awe-inspiring, touching. Thank you, UCT students. And that, of course, is in relation to the removal of the Cecil John Rhodes statue at UCT. Sandra February at, I think it says February, who says, so proud to have been part of this monumental monument. Hashtag Rhodes has fallen. And we know that over the last month or so, there's been some intense debates around that part of South African Cape Town around whether the statue has fallen, and then the overwhelming move yesterday to remove it. Hashtag Rhodes has fallen for those who didn't think it could happen, and that comes from Offbeat crimson. Now, I think it's time for our tweet of the week, and it comes from Raymond Alexander, who talks of hashtag poverty, hashtag inequality, and hashtag roads has fallen. And sadly, he says that fallen, sadly, Madiba's legacy of forgiveness has been thrown out of the window, and so is the Rainbow Nation. That's Raymond Alexander. And I don't know what you think about it. You can, of course, tweet us at SABC Newsroom and let us know if you agree with that statement coming from Raymond, and whether this is maybe the vision that Tata Madiba had when he talked about that Rainbow Nation. Let's now take a look at the front pages from around the globe. We start in Australia. The Australian reports that if Farage were to be killed, he would not be the first Australian Al-Qaeda target of the US. And staying in Australia, the Daily Telegraph, the grief-stricken fiancé of murdered schoolteacher Stephanie Scott, broke down as he joined hundreds of mourners, a cleaner at the school where Stephanie worked. Vincent Stanford was charged with her brutal murder just days before the 26-year-old English teacher was due to have been married. That's tomorrow. And let's move to the US now. The Washington Post reports that Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei on Thursday demanded that all sanctions on Iran be lifted at the same time as any final agreement with world powers on curbing Tehran's nuclear program is concluded. Okay, now let's take a look at what is happening around the country. We start in Johannesburg, where taxi driver Matome Tamache, who is accused of knocking down a woman and dragging her underneath his taxi in 2011, is expected to appear in the Randburg Magistrates Court today. Still in Johannesburg, 10 men, including a former Bafana player, are expected to appear in a Boksburg court today after they attempted to hijack a truck that was transporting cigarettes. And in Nelspruit, the ANC Women's League will hold an elective conference today where Angie Motshekga will deliver a keynote address to 704 delegates from 291 branches who are expected to attend. Okay, that's where we leave Newsroom for now. You can tweet us at SABC Newsroom. Let's take a break. You don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching SABC Newsroom. Today we commemorate and celebrate the life and time of former leader of the South African Communist Party and Chief of Staff of Umkhonto we Sizwe, Chris Hani, born Martin Dembisile Hani on the 28th of June 1942. He was a fierce opponent of the apartheid government. Chris Hani was assassinated on the 10th of April 1993 outside his home in Dawn Park, a racially mixed suburb of Boksburg. Leaders of the ANC alliance, led by President Jacob Zuma, will pay pay tribute to the slain SACP General Secretary. President Zuma will declare his grave a heritage site and unveil the Chris Hani Memorial and Walk of Remembrance Monument. 22 years after his death, Chris Hani, a number of questions that still confront the South African society. Has the apartheid system been dismantled? Did men like Chris Hani die in vain? And is reconciliation that many South Africans fought and died for still possible? To answer these questions, of course, we are joined by the our SABC reporter, Yelisa Njamela, who's in Boksburg, and she's joined by a guest. Yelisa, good morning. Just set the scene for us this morning.
It's a very good morning, of course, indeed, Sam, though we can hardly hear you here, but it's a very cold one here in Boksburg, where we're coming through to you live as we're carrying this broadcast throughout the day. It's worth noting on this day, as we celebrate the life of Chris Hani, it's worth noting that South Africa today could be telling an entirely different story. A different narrative could have emerged here had it not, of course, amongst one of the things, had it not been for the late former president, Nelson Mandela, appealing all those many years ago, appealing to South Africans to remain calm after the assassination. And at the time, the then President F.W. de Klerk had taken an unprecedented move to allow President Nelson Mandela to go on and address the nation on national television. That was, of course, something that was reserved, or still reserved, for only President to be able to address the nation at large on national television. 22 years later, we're here today to celebrate this giant's life again, and we know today that President Jacob Zuma will be making sure that this site, or rather unveiling this site as a heritage site. But having said that, we're joined now by the chairperson of the ANC in Ekurhuleni, Umzwandile Masina. Thank you so much for joining us in this cold morning in Ekurhuleni in Boksburg. First, this month in Ekurhuleni is being celebrated as a Heroes Month, and Chris Hani as one of those who are being celebrated. Tell us more about this one.
Yes, this is a very important political month to us, not only in Ekurhuleni, in Gauteng and in South Africa. You'll recall that a few days ago we commemorated the 36th anniversary of the passing away of Solomon Mahlangu, who was hanged by the apartheid government. We are here today, 4 days later, to celebrate a life well lived but taken brutally by apartheid, Comrade Chris Hani, as we have narrated. And on the 24th, we'll be celebrating a life of the longest-serving president of the African National Congress, who is also lying here in Ekurhuleni, Comrade O.R. Tambo. So we're very honored as the African National Congress in this area to be celebrating lives of giants of the magnitude of these three individuals during this month of April.
It's interesting that on this very year that the president is going to declare this site as a heritage site, we also have history unfolding in other parts of the country, like the road statue falling in Cape Town. Your thoughts?
Well, our thoughts, we support the students of the UCT on the campaign, and we want to call upon many other students in different parts of the country to call for the removal of these statues, because they are a symbol of colonial and apartheid rule, which was a very bad combination for the majority of our people. We are here today. I'm sure we'll be calling, as the African National Congress in the area, the building of the statue of Chris Hani in the city government of Ekurhuleni. This to us is a starting point. We would want to call the government to declare it as a national heritage here, so that many South Africans can learn, as we were narrating, that this day is a day that gave us clearly what we now know as Freedom Day, the 27th of April. So we're very happy to be here, even though it was a sad moment at that particular time. As young revolutionaries, we came from the areas of Katlehong to Boksburg, marching, hoping that we'll find the commander of Mkhonto Wesizwe still alive. But as we all know it, Chris Hani is no more, but we're here to live, to celebrate and live his legacy, as many South Africans would want them to know.
While we are on this topic, Mr. Masina, one finds it interesting that you would encourage the students and other students to ensure that these colonial statues and other symbols are broken down, rightfully so. However, one can also argue that the government, or rather the ANC government, your organization, has thus far failed to ensure that that is happening. For instance, for example, one of the political analysts said, right after 1994, perhaps it should have been made something that is important to ensure that all those symbols, including the streets' names, are done away with and not wait for 21 years?
Well, there were a lot of trade-offs during the negotiations and the period thereafter. So all of us must understand that if it needed to take 21 years for us to make that particular call, time is now. Statues must go. We want to ensure that the country is representative of what broader South African is, and we support this this call as the region of Ekurhuleni. And I'm not sure. I'm not here to speak for the government of South Africa. I would want to see all symbols of colonial rule here in Ekurhuleni being removed, and we have mobilized our structures in the same line that students have mobilized themselves in UCT when they were calling for the removal of this thief Cecil John Rose, who is lying in Zimbabwe. So I do want to make this call very strongly that if we're to wait for 21 years to ensure that we're in a stable country, and as we move towards the second transition, where we're moving now to focus more on the radical economic program, and it's important for us to revisit the reconciliation program, because you will recall 22 years ago, there's a revolutionary song here that was sang, which the courts ultimately found that it was racially offensive. We had to stop to sing that particular song. So it can't always be that we as black Africans are the ones who are on the receiving ends, who must always be apologetic. We want the statues to go, and we support the democratic government movement to erect democratic places like this Wall of Remembrance here today.
It's always a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Mzondile Masina, chairperson of the ANC in Ekurhuleni. We'll be bringing you all those broadcasts throughout the day for as long as the program is ongoing, and we'll probably chat with the ANC chairperson again here in Ekurhuleni, Mzondile Masina. Let's take it back to you, Sam.
Yolisa and Jamela, thank you very much all the way from Boksburg in Ekurhuleni, looking at that Wall of Remembrance. And of course, the President, Jacob Zuma, expected to pay tribute to the slain SACP General Secretary Chris Hani. And of course, his gravesite will be declared a heritage site. And there'll also be the Chris Hani Memorial and the Walk of Remembrance Monument. Okay. It's time now for us to take a look at your tweets. Please remember to send us your views on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Our plasma right now comes from Sipile Slatika. It says, I've never wanted to spare myself because I feel there are people who are no longer around and died for the struggle. Hashtag Chris Hani. We've also got Wolf of Bree Street, and until the full truth is told, no parole for the murderers. That's also at hashtag Chris Hani, of course, in remembrance of our slain hero. Lungile Zan says, today we remember a giant, a powerful man who died for the ideals of an equal and fair society. Your ideals are our inheritance. Another one from Siplile Slawatika says, 22 years have passed. What have we learned from the ultimate sacrifice that is hashtag Chris Hani made on that fateful day 22 years ago, of course, when he was gunned down in his driveway. Okay, it's time for us to take a look at the picture of the day that comes from John Karen, and it's captioned Heroes at Work at the Cape Fire. I don't know if you remember this very emotional story, and the pictures on the front page of all the newspapers of people that lost their possessions on top of Table Mountain. Near thousands and thousands of hectares property destroyed in that fire. That's our viewer pick of the day. Okay, now let's take a look at what's happening on our Newsroom Facebook page. And that's today, and it says the DA has called for a debate in Parliament on the issues of statues in the country. The parties joined the ANC and others in condemning the defacing of the Louis Botha statue outside Parliament on Wednesday night. Then the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa have instructed its members not to report for duty at the construction site of Eskom's multi-billion rand Medupi power station in Lephalale until Eskom responds to the workers' memorandum of demands. And the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei yesterday demanded that all sanctions on Iran be lifted at the same time as any final agreement with world powers on curbing Tehran's nuclear program has been finalized. You can find all of these stories and more on our Newsroom Facebook page or visit our SABC website, which is www.sabc.co.za/news. Okay, we'll take a break here on Newsroom. We'll be back. You don't go anywhere.
In Africa, mobile devices are tools to make payments, browse the internet, and keep governments in check with social media forums.
It's given an average African too much power in their hands.
And tech creativity is solving some of the continent's problems.
Everything is internet driven.
And on Network, we tell you how Africans are using technology and social media in their everyday lives.
Join Siphumelele Zondi on Network every Sunday at 19:30 CAT. Zoom into Africa. This is Seychelles. The president is Mr. James Michel James. Seychelles got independent from United Kingdom on 29 June in 1976. The population is over 80,000 people. One of the major languages spoken is English. Monetary unit is the Seychelles rupee.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's just have a look at the stories making headlines today. Leaders of the ANC alliance, led by President Jacob Zuma, will pay tribute to the late struggle stalwart Chris Hani. Today marks the 22nd anniversary of the former SACP General Secretary's death. The Chris Hani Memorial and Walk of Remembrance monuments will also be unveiled in Johannesburg. This as a series of events are underway countrywide. Angry residents have gone on the rampage at Umlazi, south of Durban. Last night, foreign shop owners were forced to abandon their shops under heavy police guard as the community looted businesses. About half a dozen shops were vacated. Community members say the looting was sparked by the death of a woman who was shot dead, allegedly by one of the foreign nationals. And the celebrated voice of cricket, Richie Benaud, has died at the age of 84. After battling skin cancer, the news of Benaud's death has prompted a flood of tributes from around the world. The former Australian cricket captain was known as a giant figure both on and off the field. Benaud died in his sleep in a Sydney hospice late yesterday. Remember, you can find all of those stories on Facebook and on our Twitter page. Just search for @SABC Newsroom. Sam, back to you.
Thanks, Hani. Now, what does it take to summit Mount Everest? We know that prospective climbers need to train in a variety of ways. They need endurance, stamina, and strength. But this does not necessarily mean they will stand tall on the world's highest mountain, as only about 1 in 4 will succeed. To tell us a bit more about why and how she will be conquering Everest this year is experienced mountain climber Katlego Tateo. Katlego, thank you very much for joining us here in Newsroom.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, how do you even begin to prepare for what has been described as one of the toughest climbs in history?
By doing many, many climbs prior to this one. My first expedition at high altitude was Mount Kilimanjaro 6 years ago, and I haven't stopped since. So it's a combination of factors. It's not only just fitness. It's not only just the mental strength. You also need the mountain to work with you. So sometimes people don't succeed not because they haven't prepared enough, just because the mountain has got to let you climb it. The weather conditions and everything else that go with that have to work in your favor.
Obviously, there's a lot of planning that goes into it and all of that kind of stuff. But I can only imagine when you're discussing it with your team. I mean, Mount Everest is one of those climbs that every decent mountain climber or any respected mountain climber has to do. But what kind of preparation goes down from a weekly to a monthly as you inch closer and closer to D-Day?
We started with very heavy cardio. And from there, we moved on to upper body strength, and we did a lot of high interval intensity training. But aside from all of that work that we do, I trained at the Wanderers Stadium with Jeff Lansky. In addition to all of that, I had to go to Scotland because it offered the best weather conditions for me to train right now. Just using my equipment, getting comfortable with the boots, getting comfortable with the gear. You don't ever want to be on Mount Everest and trying on new gear or trying on any new thing. When you get there, you have to be ready, and you have to be able to use everything intuitively. So it's a lot of practical work. I'm at the gym 5 days a week. On Saturdays and Sundays, I'm in the mountains, either rock climbing or scrambling or speed hiking. So it is a lot of dedicated effort. And the challenge for me was trying to do all of that and retaining my weight, because after Mount Everest, I'm going to North America to attend Mount McKinley, and shortly after that, Russia to attempt Mount Elbrus. So back-to-back at a go, an average person on Mount Everest loses about 10 kilograms. And I'm shortly going on another expedition after that. So
there's a lot of climbing in your future.
A lot of climbing, yes.
Over the last couple of years, we've seen a decline in the quality of Mount Everest, just because of the sheer number of climbers that kind of make this their holy grail of sorts, the elusive Mount Everest climb. What are you and the team discussing around that? Because I've heard that sometimes the conditions are very treacherous. The conditions have deteriorated. In your mind, how do you prepare for the worst eventuality?
We looked at all the routes possible to get to the top, and that motivated our decision to climb from the north. When you look at the situation on the south side, what happened last year and what happened over the past few years, it was inevitable. It had to get to that point, because essentially the climber can qualify or can afford to get on the mountain. Not necessarily qualify, if they can afford to get on the mountain, they get a climbing permit, because in Nepal, they don't regulate the climbing experience. They don't regulate the number of applicants. It's a money-making business. Look at what happens on the north side. In Tibet, if you're having to climb, they look at your climbing resume. They kept the number of climbing permits. So
regulations are stricter?
It's a stricter one, yes. And the Chinese government puts the ropes up. So you kind of control that whole commercialism of the sport to a cap on the north side. That is why I'm still here. All the other climbers who are climbing from the south side have left for the mountain already. I'm only leaving tomorrow because the weather conditions also allow for the summit later in May.
I mean, you're going to fly the flag very high for South Africa. And talking to you now, it brings back memories of Sibusiso Vilani, one of the first women to ever summit Mount Everest, Station Dazel.
Kathy O'Dowd.
But she was one of the first teams to go up into Mount Everest, Station Dazel. Just talk to me about that. Are you kind of aware of what it means as a South African to reach the top and put that your South African flag there? And what will you be saying to other women that are following your footsteps, that are following you, that come from where you come, from your part of South Africa? What are you saying to other women? What are you hoping to say?
The responsibility doesn't escape me, and I'll explain why. Because mountaineering sport is not a spectator sport. We've kind of gotten to a point where participants have to be apologetic about why they climb. And so you climb for raising funds for a charity, and that's why it took me so long to raise funds for this expedition, because I wanted to promote the sport. I wanted the only reason for my climbing to raise the flag. And so if I don't make it to the summit, I've set myself up for a big explanation to my kids and the schools that we're working with, etc. But
there's 5 schools.
There's 5 schools involved in the Bajanal district where I grew up. But the message that I have maybe for other women who are interested in this is Deshan Dazel, Evelyn Chabalala, and Kathy O'Dowd, and all the women who've done this were an inspiration. But to us in the village, we didn't know about them.
Yeah.
So when finally Kathy, managed to get to the top, to us it sent out the message that it can be doable, but I didn't know how. So it took me a while to get to a point of, reaching out to Sibusiso Vilani and people starting to be more accessible to us.
For sure.
And that's what I hope to be.
Well, we're going to follow your story with interest. Thank you very much for joining me. That's Katlego Leteo who's about to summit Mount Everest. She's leaving South Africa tomorrow. Okay, let's have a look at what people are saying on Twitter. Please remember to send us your views on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. This one comes from, and I'm going to try and get to that name. It says from Malefi, who says, probably the player to open doors for others in Europe. Rest in peace. And of course, he's talking about Steve Kalamazoo. His memorial service is today. We were expecting, of course, the Minister of Sport, Kilambulula, to join us here in studio and share that thoughts. That's not going to be happening. But our thoughts are, of course, with the family and friends. Cheryl Roberts says, remembering with respect and admiration the life of one of South Africa's great footballers. That's hashtag Steve Kalamazoo, who has passed away. And he passed away untimely. I think it was 82, 83 or something. And also don't forget, of course, he was one of the first players to take part in Play for Europe. This comes from Ruby Chakuru, who says, we need a statue of Steve Kalamazoo. Mokome Minister, the man was honoured with a street name in Europe. From Cheryl Roberts as well, remembering with respect and admiration the life of one of South Africa's great footballers. I think we've just read this one, hashtag Steve Kalamazoo, who has passed away at Safa _net. Okay, so it's truly a deeply emotional time for South Africans, as we not only, of course, commemorate the anniversary of one of our struggle icons who was gunned down so callously, Chris Hani, but also a memorial service today for one of the pioneers of soccer here in our country, Kalamazoo. Now, this year's 34th Lesotho Land Festival is around the corner. The festival will boast the hottest lineup in South African music, with some of the country's finest bands, artists and DJs performing. From the 24th of April until the 2nd of May, it will be the feast of local music with a host of Portuguese artists that will keep the traditional atmosphere going. To tell us more of what we can expect, we are joined today by an executive committee member of the Lesotho School, Naomi Kotente, and we also have the pleasure of being joined by one of the artists. I think she's going to play us out a little bit later. I saw her rehearsing, Ashlyn Gray. Naomi, did I get your name right? Your surname right?
Yes.
Okay, spot on. Let's talk about Lesotho Land. I mean, as long as I can remember, it's been a calendar event, it's been a family event, it's something that in my circle, it's something you have to do every year because it's the place to be. What makes it such a festival that keeps on going and that keeps on being attractive to people?
Well, I think it's a fantastic festival. It's a family festival, so we cater for everyone across the line. Not at the Portuguese food. We've got the stalls, the vendors. We've got 143 stalls. We cater for the children during the holidays and the weekends. We cater with face painting and the stalk walker and the balloon maker. So, and we've got the fun fair, and then the music. We have the music right across. We cater for the Afrikaans, for the Portuguese community, for the South Africa, the kids, the youngsters. So I think it's definitely a festival you have to go to. There's no doubt about it. It's amazing. It's a full day, and you get something out of it every single day you go there. If it's not the entertainment, it's the food. It's it's really a must go. A must go.
South Africans, for over the last year or two, seems to have reconnected with outdoor events and going to stuff. And I don't know if Lesotho Land experienced it, but for some part there used to be a little bit of a dip. Over the last year and a half, you've started seeing all these weekend food getaways, food festivals. And I'm not sure if they're competing with Lesotho Land because you've got a history on your side and you've got a stellar event on your side. But talk to me about just the growth over the last 10 years. I mean, you're 34 years in existence. I mean, that's not a small feat at all.
No, not at all. No, we've grown considerably and we're very proud of it. I think as South Africans, we like the outdoor. There's no doubt about it. So it's a good time to go out there and have good fun. And you do have good fun. And you carry your whole family with you. So, and we have grown considerably. But I also think that we cater for our music market, the South African music. We really are very, very, very into the South African music, and we do. We have all the South African, as many South African artists as we can get on the show. And then we have our folk dancing. So we bring back a bit of the Portuguese taste, the food. It's a fantastic festival, there's no doubt about it, and we hope everybody's going to support it. We need the support because this is the main event that we have to make money to run the school. It is a handicapped school. We have got 70 children.
And I wanted to talk about that as well, yeah.
Yes, so it's very important that it's a success because that's the money that we use to run the school. So.
On average, I'm not going to ask you how much money you raise at Lesotho Land, but just from an operational cost, what does it take to run that school?
The school itself, well, I'll just give you a little bit of an insight that each child costs us 4,700 Rand per month to have them at the school. Out of that, we get 1,000 Rand from the parents, which is the school fees. So the 3,700 Rand has to come from this festival. Mainly from this festival. So it's very important. This festival is very important to us because we're not subsidised, so we have to make the money. As the committee, we make the money. It's an MPO, so, you know, we have to...
So there's no excuse.
No.
Now, let me bring Ashlyn in here very quickly, because you were talking about South African music, and you were talking about that this is a festival. If you love South African music, this is ultimately where you need to be. Your first time performing at Lesotho Land, but I can only imagine that, like me, you've been to it, you've seen it.
Yes, and it's such a great event, and never mind that, it's a great party. I mean, you get to just have a lot of fun time with your family, which I love.
Are you under pressure, when you're performing? I can only imagine that when you're headlining an act and you're performing across the world or whatever, it's a different pressure to this, because people here are coming to have fun, but at the same time, obviously, you want people to buy your music and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the pressure is obviously there because you want to put on a good performance for such a great event, but it's actually such a great time. I think it's more about connecting with the audience and just, you know, having that special moment with them. Whereas, you know, if you're doing a big headlining act, it's more about, you know, who you are as an artist. And
how do you describe your sound? Because I heard you rehearse a little bit, and the first thing that popped in my mind was Josie Fields. You sound a little bit, you've got those elements of Josie Fields. Am I right or wrong? I don't want to put you in a category because no artist needs to be in a category, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, it's got like folk kind of element to it, so maybe that's where it's coming from.
Okay. We're going to leave this conversation. That was Naomi Kadente, who's a member of the Lesotho School. Look, Lesotho Land is part of our culture, part of our history. You just gotta go. Take your friends, your family, the neighbour you're not talking to, grab him, and all go there, and you can find some reconciliation there. And also Ashlyn Gray, who's our performer here in studio. I just got it from my director that you're going to perform for us.
Yes.
And that you'll be closing out our show. Okay, we've recorded it. Take a look at this.
There's a voice inside my head, and it won't let me sleep. Keeps telling me I can't, locks doors and hides the keys, doubting every move I make. Are they right or are they wrong? No dotted line or eggs, on a journey on my own. I'll bring my battleships to war, with sword and shield in hand. I won't let him win, we got another plan. I'll bring my battleships to war. Through thick and thin we'll go. Won't stop until we conquer this war we've come to know. I won't surrender. I'm not sending out an SOS. I won't surrender. I'm not sending out an SOS. Every word you throw at me can't hurt me anymore. Was down but I got up. Won't lose cause I'm fighting for a chance to live each day. I'm giving it my all. I'm moving on without the fear I felt before. I'm bringing my battleships to war, with sword and shield in hand. I won't let him win, we got another plan. I'll bring my battleships to war. Through thick and thin we'll go. Won't stop until we conquer this war we've come to know. I won't surrender. I'm not sending out an SOS. I won't surrender. I'm not sending out an SOS. Even if I feel like giving up, I'm not gonna stop until it's over. I'll be standing stronger than before, so much stronger than before. I won't surrender. Not sending out an SOS. I won't surrender.